is strong.
Yeah, just watch your step, Moshe.
Yeah,
Good morning.
rest of my stroke, 5 lengths.
Yeah.
Big over the ground.
Yeah, I think New York, you're going to see a mass exodus from New York. I think a lot of Jews are going to move out of New York. A big chunk of them will probably make Aliyah, but not everyone can do it.
But they will buy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. It's just going to make it more difficult for the average person to be able to afford it. Because the shekel is so, like Moshe was saying yesterday, the shekel is so strong right now.
It has been, it has continued
Yeah.
over the war.
So-
Canadian is 2.32.
Anyway, we got Marv on the line. He's got a new grandson. Yeah. Yeah. Al. Let's see. Who else? Stevie. Yeah. Wayne has a granddaughter. Granddaughter. Yeah. It's good. It's all good. Shah Tova.
I got one any day.
Really?
Oh, sure.
Oh, Shah Tova. That's amazing. Okay. Baby season.
Will it multiply?
Yeah. There you go. All right. Let's get started. Okay. Ona pachos mishtus and mutal. We've talked about this before as well. We know that overcharging is ona'ah, it's prohibited, but if it's exactly a sixth over the fair market value, the buyer is entitled to a refund of that overpay, but cannot cancel the sale. If it's more than a sixth of overcharge, then he can actually void the entire sale. What if it's less than a sixth? Well, we learned that it's usser, but there's nothing, it's not actionable. There's nothing you can do to demand a refund. The question here is, then could you justify doing it lechatchila? So Amru Chazal shana pachos mishtus nikna hamekach v'enu chayv lahachzir hama'anes ha'ona v'yishlach kor ma'atam she'enu chayv lahachzir v'ha'im lechatchila muter lahonos b'pachos mishtus. So that he's really asking two questions. Why is it that when someone gets overcharged less than a sixth, they have no recourse? And could one argue, therefore, that it's muter lechatchila? So the answer is as follows: Ona pachos mishtus hadin hu shenikna hamekach ve'enu chayv lahachzir ha'ona. He says when the ona is less than a sixth, then b'di'eved, the sale is final, and the seller has no obligation to return the overcharge. V'hatam shekol pachos mishtus derech hakol limchol. And the reason is because generally speaking, people, the average average attitude is, all right, it was a sixth, let's say a seventh more than it was 10%. He charged me an extra 10%. Not a big deal. I'll be moichel. And the second reason is because not everyone can get the exact fair market value. There is fluctuation within even the most adjusted markets. And therefore, even a valuator who tries to give fair market value, there's always a margin of error, more or less of 1/6. And therefore, generally speaking, we assume that most people are mochel. Uledas marna shulchan aruch b'harama kol pachos mishtus yesh kan mechila bein im hatos b'shumas hachefetz uvein min hadavar yesh lo mechir kavua b'shuk. He says, therefore, according to the Shulchan Aruch, anytime the overcharge is less than a sixth, we assume that the buyer is moichel, whether it's because you can't always get the valuation exactly right, but even if it's something that has a fixed index value in the marketplace, kagon lechem, challah, v'chol kayotze b'zeh, like bread, milk, the staples that are sort of government-controlled pricing. He says, "Shederech ha'olam limchol kol shu pachos mishtus." People are generally moichel if something is less than a sixth. Umi kol mako. Nonetheless, that notwithstanding, ma de almaynu shepachos mishtos derech kol limchol kol ze davka ba'ona b'damim. That's only true that when we say that people are moichel, that's only true when the overcharge is financial. So, for example, if a person sold an object that is worth 6 and he sold it for 5 and he undercharged, we assume that the seller is moichel. But when it comes to a mistake or an overcharge or an underpay that is that's based on inventory. So, for example, a guy orders a pound and the butcher gives him 0.98 pounds. So even the slightest variation of mistake when it comes to weights and measures, nikna hamekach umachzer hatos v'afilo achar kama shanim. That's something that we say in halacha, the sale is final, but whoever is in error has to make good on that error. And there's no time limit on that. It's not like Ona, where we said you have a certain time limit where you can see, show it to someone and say, did I get a good price or not? Similarly, let's say a person made a mistake in the amount of money that he paid. He thought he was giving let's say $75, and instead by mistake he gave $77. That's something that he's entitled to get back, and his money must be returned. We don't say, oh, well, it's less than a sixth, he's moichel. And this is true even after the kinyan was made and the transaction is complete and final. There's been an exchange of cash for goods. Nonetheless, any kinyan that is made because of a mistake in weights, measures, or amounts, you have to be exact when it comes to those things. You don't say the Chafetz Chaim story that I mentioned the other day, where he owned a general store and he realized that the scales were miscalibrated. And when he discovered that secret, he realized that he was shortchanging his customers by a very small amount. But what he did was, for the next 30 days, any customer who came in and ordered, let's say, a pound of flour, he added a little bag of flour. In addition, he had a little added flour. So make sure that every single customer knew that there was a mistake and the Chafetz Chaim was trying to correct it. Well, the inyan and mutter,
You would have to do tshuva too.
I guess, it's tshuva on something that it was bishogeg. It was bishogeg, but still you have to do tshuva on things that are done bishogeg also. Like if I accidentally harm somebody and I feel terrible about it, I have to do tshuva for that also. I have to ask them mechila and so forth. Well, the inyan in mutter lechatchila lahanos bepachos mishtus hadavar hu besafek kishiyesh ba'ona shavapruta v'yiresh maim yachner bazeh. So as far as whether it's permissible to overcharge or by a small amount, the poskim remain in doubt about this, and a God-fearing person should be machmir. Uvapachos mi pruta, but if it's less than a pruta, which is like 3 cents, nira de imnasa hamaisa ein iser bedavar umuter, then ve'eno doma legeneva gazela. He says that to me is fine. It's not, because the amount is so minuscule. Okay, so we go to the next one. Okay. Generally speaking, the poskim say that even overcharging less than a sixth is usher. So I don't know where he gets this idea that there's some who say that it may be okay. Okay. All right, let us go on. Siman Yud Beis. He says, we said above that a person, there is a time, like a statute of limitations. There's a time limit when you realize that you've been ripped off, there's a time limit for how much time you have to go back to the seller and say, I want to void the sale, or I want what the overpay was. I want it to be restored to me. So, and that was the amount of time that it takes to show to a tagar, that it takes to show to a merchant. So, Ha'im zman zeh shayach gam kein kishenisana hamocher? Is that true even when the seller was ripped off? Kigon shemachar bepachos ma'ashiva shel hachefetz. Let's say he sold the item for less than what it was worth. V'yesh lishol eitzel hatagar o likrovo kidei litvoa ha'ona o levatel hamekach. He says he has the time after he made the sale, but now all he has is cash in hand. So does he have the same time limit where, a buyer who gets ripped off, certainly he has the ability to show his merchandise to someone who can tell him, you got ripped off, or you did not make a good purchase, and you should ask for your money back. You really overpaid on that item. However, what about a seller? Does the seller have that same leeway, or that latitude? Or do we say that a seller should have known? I mean, it's your business. You should have known that you were selling something that was worth X and you sold it for X minus. So the answer is mocher shenisana la'olam yachol lachzor ba'ona ve'ein sarach loymar bitol hamekach lefi she'ein lo ma laharos latagar ve'eino yodea hashiva shel hadavar shemochar ad shiyara kamos or shenimkar b'shuk. So apparently, according to the halacha, a seller has more latitude than a buyer as far as the time limit. And the reason is the seller has more latitude because he doesn't have anything to show. He doesn't have any merchandise anymore. He sold his merchandise. And therefore, I guess the argument is it's going to take him more time to find something identical to the item that he sold to be able to say, did I sell it for a good price? And therefore, if a guy sold something that has a uniformity across the marketplace, meaning that what I sold is available by other sellers as well. So, for example, a guy sells peppercorns. Okay, that's his example. So he has, how much time does he have to say, I blew it and I didn't charge the right amount? The amount of time that it takes to find out what the peppercorn index, is. Okay? V'chein imnoda shebo liyado shel hamocher shuv mechira kazu v'yado shetava lo tava enu yochol lachzor v'litvoa. Another time limitation would be imposed on a seller who has multiple units of that same merchandise. So, for example, if he's got a whole warehouse of widgets and then he sells the first widget for substantially less than what it's worth, well, he only has time he can show his other widgets to experts in the marketplace to find out what it's worth. So therefore he's also limited in the same way that a buyer is limited. Shemistama anu omrim shemachal, because if he doesn't take action immediately, we assume that he's moichal. And when we say that a seller, therefore, has the ability to ask for the item back because he undercharged for it, that's only if the price has remained stable. Aval im nishtana hashar lifnei kein, v'rotze lachzer bo achar kach einenu rishai. But let's say the market value of the item has changed. He sells it, and then he discovers the market value has changed dramatically to the point where he could sell this for far more. He wants to therefore invalidate the sale. That he doesn't have a right to do. And that's true even if he undercharged even based on the old price. So let's say the old price The item was worth 5, he only charged 4. So that's more than a sixth, okay? But then he discovers there's been a fluctuation in the market value and the item is now worth 10. So he wants to say, oh, I should, I want to really invalidate this sale. See, so we say to him, no, you don't have a right to do that. Sha'anu omrim ulay yada mikodem umachal, because our argument is that maybe when the market value was only 5, he knew what the fair market value was, and he decided to be moichel. And he said, I'll sell it for 4. Or immediately after he sold it for 4, he realized that it was worth 5, and he said, it's not worth it to go after the guy for just that small amount of underpay. And therefore our suspicion is that the reason why he wants to go after the buyer now is because he could really get 10 for it. And another circumstance where we would not allow a seller to void the sale is if we know circumstantially, like we know that the circumstance under which he sold the product was that he needed cash right away. He needed to liquidate all of his assets. Okay? So he sells it for, let's say, pennies on the dollar because he needs to get cash immediately. The next day, he discovers that he got an inheritance came in, and he really did not need to liquidate his merchandise. He can't now go back to the buyer and say, I want to void the sale. Sorry, you knew that you were seriously discounting these items because you thought you needed to move them immediately. Now that your circumstances have changed, that's too bad on you. A seller can only go back on the deal when he really innocently did not realize that he was undercharging and he had no reason to undercharge.
Isn't there something about about selling a house and making aliyah, and if you change your mind or something like that, you can, maybe I'm misremembering.
We had a tshuva in the Baruch Omer from Rav Shraga, where he talked about a guy who had planned to make aliyah and therefore sold his apartment or sold his house, and then his plans for aliyah fell through.
Yeah.
Or not just aliyah, a guy was planning to move to New York or to Florida.
So you would move to New York
Yeah,
now.
no one's moving to New York today.
From New York.
Yeah. So in that case, we had said that since if you stipulated at the time of the sale, I'm selling my apartment because I'm making aliyah.
On condition, you say? Or
No, it wasn't on condition, but it's
Just
clear
giving-
to the buyer and to the seller that the reason he's selling is because of aliyah. Then there is wiggle room for the seller to say, you realize that I sold it under those conditions, and therefore we say that there is room for him to void the sale. However, it's very hard to make that argument in most cases. Yeah. Okay. So the next part that we're looking at today is what's called shar mekach tos, when a sale or a purchase is made under false pretenses, or I don't know why this happens. There's a lot of pages that are just blank. So let's move on. Dine mekach tos shelos utshuvos b'ktsara. Short questions and answers regarding mistaken transactions. So, she'ela misha kana eza chafatzim mesuyamim v'nimtza mum b'mekach v'hakona chozer bo. So you buy a bunch of merchandise and you discover that there's defects within the merchandise. Ha'im yachol hamocher litin lo metaltalin acherim o davke kesef tzarach lahachzer. Does the seller have a right to say, I'll replace the merchandise? Or does he have to, or can the buyer say, no, I want to void the sale and I demand cash?
Why would it just be up to the buyer to say, hey, make the decision?
Well, that's the question. Does the seller do we protect the seller or do we protect the buyer in this case? The seller was reliant on that cash. He has an abundance of
They
merchandise.
sold something that was good.
Yeah, so that's the question. So,
So it's up to the buyer, you would say,
I would say it's the buyer, yeah, it's not even a question.
so you would say it's up to the buyer
It's not-
100% of the time.
even The guy, even if it was done unintentionally, like even as Michelle gave, like, I mean, the stuff came in and it's all rotten or it's all has holes in it or whatever it is when they open the box.
Yeah.
It's not bilingual and they send it back to you and they fine you, no, yeah, I've had it.
So what if the seller says, I'm getting another shipment in tomorrow of the same item and it's perfectly fine. And I'm going to ship that to you.
If that's the case and it works out that I can.
No, and the buyer says, no, I want my money back. So who's right in that situation? What would you do, Moish? What would you say?
What I would
Retain the
say is
relationship.
if I can, well, there's all these other extenuating
Factors, yeah.
circumstances. You know, if my customer who I sold it to would accept a delay for a day or two to get the right stuff in, then I would take it, because you don't want to miss the sale. But if I lose the sale, return the goods and give me my money back.
Okay, but you're saying that it should be the buyer's prerogative.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Rabbi, in
Yes, Marv. Yes, Marv.
in secular law, it would depend on the how serious the defects were. If they were not significantly defective, then you would just get your money, you would get damages for the defective goods, but the contract would still be extant. If it's a fundamental breach and it's really defective, it would void the contract, you get all your money back and the contract's voidable.
But that's a very subjective kind of thing, Marv. That would depend upon the judge's estimation. Is this a serious defect or not?
Right.
let's
So
say
you'd have to get experts.
you'd have to get experts to come in.
No, that doesn't.
You hear what Moish is saying is that like when you're a businessman, to have to go through all of that, I guess if there's a lawsuit, then that's when you bring in the experts, right? But
That's correct. Yeah.
And when you have important business relationships, it's almost like the buyer is always right. I mean, I get to do this all the time. People, stores want to return things or whatever. If they're a good customer, a serious customer, you sort of look the other way, for things, because you want to maintain the relationship. So.
If a guy buys from you $1 million a year and he wants to return 5,000, he does it once in a blue moon, you say, I'm sorry that you're not happy, of course I'll take it back.
Yeah.
Like, everything is subjective, there's no. But the buyer is.
well, we're talking about what are the rights. So let's see.
Right.
Let's see what the halacha says. Kona shematza mum b'mekach v'chozer u'mevatel samechach es hamekach. So if a buyer finds a defect in the merchandise and he has the right to void the sale, kol zman sheyesh l'mocher kesef mezuman tzorech liten es hakesef sheshilim avur hamekach. So if the seller has the liquidity, like he still has the cash, then he's obligated to give the buyer back his money. He's not allowed to give him other merchandise as a replacement. However, what if the seller claims, I don't have the cash? The cash that you gave me,
Something else.
I bought something else with it, or I needed to pay off my debts, and I don't have the cash. So in that case, like the halacha does allow, when someone has a debt, the halacha basically says cash is king, and therefore if a person is liquid, he has to pay cash. But if a person doesn't have cash and he has other items of value, we tell him that he has to pay that, so at least to make the creditor whole. So therefore, if he doesn't have cash, he can provide him with other merchandise, even merchandise that the buyer has no interest in. But the fact is that this is true in all halacha. If I borrowed money and I default on the loan, what's the Beis Din going to do? It's going to take my assets. It's going to take my metal, to take my baseball card collection, as payment for the debt. And then we'll have to liquidate the baseball card collection. It's a bother, it's a hassle, but that's the only option. Vim ein lo metaltalin nosen amekach apogum b'toras piron. And if he doesn't have other merchandise, so the defective merchandise will be partial payment for what he owes, and he'll have to pay back, and the balance will be considered a debt, and he'll have to slowly pay it off as whenever he has it. So this is so what do you mean it's a no-go? I mean, the guy would have
If
to.
somebody owes someone money and he says, if I don't pay you back, I'll give you my Mickey Mantle card. And then the Mickey Mantle gets stolen and then he can't pay it back, but he gives him something else, he can recoup his money. That's if someone is buying is on a loan. They can always recoup of that. But when you're in business and I buy from you 1,000 of these cups, and they all come in, they all have a big line down the middle. You can't give me something else when that was sold to someone for like, that's not gonna happen. Now, if you're
only
stuck,
yeah.
obviously you're gonna take something else and try to sell to someone else. And what happens if you can't? It doesn't stem, like it doesn't fly.
No, but the halacha in all cases, the halacha does not distinguish when there's a debt based on a loan or a debt based on a business transaction that was.
You wouldn't see a difference between the two. I see a huge difference.
No, I'm saying the halacha doesn't. The halacha doesn't distinguish. The halacha says that anyone who owes money, if he can demonstrate that he simply doesn't have the cash, he doesn't have the liquidity, it would be the prerogative of the creditor to say, either I'll wait until you are liquid, or I'll take something instead of cash that has the same value that I can liquidate. Yeah.
I just don't see it in business. That doesn't.
Well, the problem is that, this guy is going to ruin his future prospects of being a vendor if that's the way he does business, right? But the fact is that sometimes people are so, like the guy's, he's a nebuch. So you had Rachmanis on him, and he told you that he had a bunch of cups for sale, and he showed you a sample. And then when the delivery comes, they've all got a big line. Okay, that the sample didn't have. So there's clearly a defect, and you're entitled to refuse delivery, but you already gave him the cash. So he says, well, I was just getting started, and I've decided to go back to Kollel now. So I don't have, or what, whatever the guy says. And so, yeah. Yeah. He says, I thought maybe I was gonna, try to work for a living, but I realized it's too much of a hassle. So I'm going back to Kollel, and I don't have any other merchandise.
Give you my extra shots here. You can take.
And so, keep the cups. They're probably worth, 75 cents on the dollar because of that defect. I'm sure you can find someone who will want to buy them. And whatever shortfall you tell me, if you paid $1,000 and now these cups are only worth $750, so I'll owe you $250, and Shalom Al Yisrael. And then the guy says, I'll pay you off over the next 5 years. I'll take off a few dollars off of my Kollel paycheck every week, and I'll eventually pay you off. What are you going to do? What are you going to do in that case? So you do have an option to say, no, halacha does not give you that latitude to make a payment plan over 5 years. Find out what else do you have of value in your house. And if he's got the Mickey Mantle card, fine. But if he doesn't have,
He's going to Kollel, they're not gonna have a Mickey Mantle.
he's a Baal Tshuva.
Got a Johnny Cap son.
Okay.
But did you hear like in business, do you hear I'm just telling you this kind of stuff would be not, it just wouldn't fly.
No, I understand in your line of business, there's a certain what's the word I'm looking for? There's a certain reputational status that every vendor wants to retain. Because people know that if a vendor screws his, excuse my language, if he screws his buyers, he's going to get a bad name in the marketplace, and and he'll be out, right? But let's say, but there are many situations where, you want to give a guy a break. You want to, that he's got a checkered past, but you want to help him because, Nebuch, he's got, and, he's got a wife, he's got kids, and you want to try to help him out. And then he ends up disappointing you. So what recourse do you have? So the halacha tells us you can collect whatever assets that he has. Okay. And it's not always going to be a situation like in your line of business where you're dealing with professionals who have companies that they need to protect. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so we're already out of time for today. Okay, we'll hold it here.